While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust, and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. As you all know, there are no silver bullets when it comes to cybersecurity success in the industrial sector. Every enterprise has its own unique characteristics, each plant floor its different connectivity elements, and each business comprised of diverse human dynamics that fuel its culture. However, regardless of the environment, there continues to be a handful of best practices that can be universally applied. As I journey across the cybersecurity realm, one of those reoccurring themes is avoiding that urge to eat the elephant or drink the ocean when implementing cybersecurity strategies. Rather, the thought process is to set priorities and check things off as you go. Our guest for today's episode mentioned this numerous times, whether it comes to responding to an increasingly complex collection of threat actors or tackling the right uses of artificial intelligence. I hope you enjoy the conversation with Casey Ellis, founder and chief strategy officer of BugCrowd, as much as I did. So, hey, Casey, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on Security Breach.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, we first connected out at the RSAC show. And we can talk a little bit. I think you guys have a cool setup, but the way your company works, I think that might be the best place to start and just sort of introducing those who are not familiar with BugCrowd to what you guys do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Obviously, I'm biased, but I agree. So BugCrowd basically pioneered the crowdsourced security as a service category. For those in the audience who know what a bug bounty program or a vulnerability disclosure program is, we didn't actually invent those. Like, those were prior art, but BugCrowd came in with this idea of basically putting a platform in between, the entire kind of community of white hat security researchers that exist around the world, and all these different problems that we're trying to solve on the defender side. The thesis really is that, our job as security defenders is to outsmart a creative adversary, and that creative adversary looks like a crowd. There's lots of different skill sets, lots of different motivations. There's an incentive towards success rather than a constraint on, hours per day that they're putting into getting their job done, all those different things. And in the meantime, you're trying to kind of outsmart that with whatever automation's available or like individuals being paid by the hour. Basically, I saw that and thought, like, the math here is wrong. And in the meantime, you've got this incredible community of hackers. And when I say hackers, these are like the locksmiths, not the burglars, right? Yeah. That were kind of waiting for an invitation to the table. So that's really what we kicked off, and, been going for 13 years now.
Awesome. How have you been able to grow the community? Is it an active recruitment? Are people coming to you? How do you kind of grow that way? Yeah,
I love that question. It's a combination of things. I think we do active recruitment for when we see like new technologies kind of coming over the hill, for example, or new threats that are sort of emergent, but that we can see will be an issue in the future. Then we'll start to train folk. We'll do education, we'll do like active recruitment, find where those communities might already exist, and then invite them onto the platform. But these days, like, it kind of grows itself. Like, there's a really strong kind of community management aspect to it. The hacker community is very social. So a lot of what we do is try to take advantage of those existing kind of social phenomena and just encourage them, like give them whatever they need to bring their peers in. Generally, when they do that, there's either like the exact same skill set, they're knowledgeable in the same area, or there's an adjacency to it because they kind of share interest and that's part of their friendship or their relationship, and you kind of grow that way. So it's a combination of things.
It's interesting. One of the questions that I've asked a lot of people that have come on the show is what keeps them or what helps them sleep at night a little bit. They're exposed to all these different problems that are going on out there. What I'm kind of wondering for you is, you can see some of the appeal to the black hat side. It's kind of sexy. It's sort of, feels like you're a spy, espionage type thing.
Yep.
How with the white hat side, how do people get more attracted to that? I guess we always hear there's more good than bad in the world. But.
No, I mean, and I think like the way I kind of tend to talk about my own career coming up in cybersecurity, because like I was hacking as a kid, right?
Yeah.
And a part of that was like I really enjoyed and still do like thinking like a criminal, but didn't want to be one. So this sort of idea of like fascination with criminal creativity, all that kind of stuff, but then this sort of moral code that prohibits like causing harm. Really, that was a lot of what I had back in the day. At a point in time that it wasn't that common, if that makes sense. I think it's a lot more common and a lot more understood on that side now. So there is still that appeal, is kind of why I bring that part up, because it's a fun thing. We do play with that a lot as well on the marketing side. Like we've got this T-shirt that says "My other computer is your computer," which is like a white hat T-shirt, right? But it's like just right on the edges there where people get kind of curious and lean in. So, but yeah, it's little things like that. It's fostering the intrigue. I think it's like a big thing that our industry has really enabled, and Bugcrowd's really tried to lead as much as we can, is actually diverting young people, especially from what would otherwise become like a life of crime. Because oftentimes you get folk that have these skill sets or have that curiosity. They're not making an active decision to become a bad guy. They just make poor choices because their skills have kind of outpaced the growth of their moral compass or whatever it might be, and end up caught up in a criminal career. There's a bunch of examples where people have come back later and just basically said, "Hey, thank you for the opportunity to find like a good faith outlet for these skills and these curiosities, because otherwise I would have been stealing cars or hacking systems or deploying ransomware or whatever else." So yeah.
Well, it's always interesting because the response to that question that I pose a lot of times is there's still a lot more good guys out there than bad guys. So if we've got more good guys, hopefully, or more people who wanted to do good, that should be feeding well.
I think that's true. I think that the good guys versus bad guys, like in terms of who's on the playing field question, I'm not sure that I fully agree with that, but yeah.
Okay, fair enough. You said Bugcrowd's been around for about 13 years. What have been some of the biggest changes or evolutions that you've seen in cybersecurity, or the types of vulnerabilities you've been looking to uncover over that time?
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, like we're constantly, and I kind of hinted at it before with the recruitment side of things, like we weren't talking about AI in 2013. For that matter, we weren't talking about IoT security in 2013, or connected vehicle security, machine learning, cloud even was just only really starting to pick up at that point in time as well. So there's been a lot of kind of evolution. I think like security, like offensive security, is ultimately a trailing indicator of the advance of technology, and technology is very different in 2025 compared to 2013. Like lots of aspects of it are still kind of the same, but there's all these kind of frontier things that change the nature of the game. So that introduces new vulnerabilities. It introduces new kind of priorities from a threat and risk standpoint. I think like the way that things are coded now is a lot quicker, which is good because you can fix things more easily. It's oftentimes not good because like speed can be the natural enemy of quality, and security is kind of quality's child. Yeah. So yeah, I would say that the short version of that answer would be that like there's a lot of things that are still the same. If you talk about IoT and OT, like we're going to get into here, like those are still like old vulnerabilities that should have been eradicated, but like building software is hard, so that's a part of why they're still there. And then we've got all of this new stuff coming out at an increasingly kind of rapid rate, and we've definitely seen kind of shifts in researcher priority and how we deploy the crowd, and even what the market's looking for in response to that.
Yeah, I'd like to dig in, if we can, a little bit to some of those OT vulnerabilities. You said they've been around for a while, a lot of them. That's something we hear a lot because a lot of these OT systems just have so much legacy equipment and connectivity involved with them.
Yep.
We also know that the new stuff has brought in more connection points, more endpoints, and the attack surface just continues to grow and grow. What are you seeing a little bit there in trying to help secure the OT environment between the old stuff and then also securing some of these new things that are being added all the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you mentioned like the evolution of cybersecurity over the past 5 years. One of the things that obviously happened that we're all aware of 5 years ago was the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And a part of what that forced in terms of the attack surface is a shift towards supporting remote work. A lot of that I think was done without necessarily thinking through the different kind of security boundaries that exist. As an example, like when we first started doing car hacking, it became obvious pretty quickly that like if you're inside a vehicle, you're like fully trusted, and if you're outside a vehicle, you're not. That's like the legacy kind of security model of a car. But if you put a head unit that's connected to the internet inside the vehicle, then all of a sudden the internet is inside the vehicle. So like it's whoops, like there was a moment for that industry that was sort of prompted by that. I think it's similar with OT. So yeah, that's more of an architectural answer, but from a vulnerability standpoint, I think probably the biggest challenge with legacy systems in OT is that you've got like custom OT middleware that was written that has a dependency on a particular operating system. And you've gone and seen this business built on top of that middleware, but then the underlying development and maintenance of the middleware itself has kind of gone away. So you end up stuck with an operating system that you can't secure. That's really common in OT. It's very common in healthcare and a bunch of other places as well. And I think that's a big one. You combine that with like too much access to the outside world, and you can kind of see why things like Colonial Pipeline happen, right? As for the new stuff, to me, securing that is more contingent on being able to resolve the availability quirks of OT environments. Like there's this phenomena where, and it exists in a lot of other places as well, but for OT where there's an always on requirement, which a lot of it has, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, go patch that thing, you're stupid if you don't, because there's all these other kind of risk considerations downstream that like security people are notorious for ignoring, if that makes sense. So I think just understanding what your cycles look like, making sure that you're building in the ability to have high availability, like however you approach it, right? Like if it's HA or distributed or whatever else, you've got the ability to actually patch things without interfering with any kind of, always on operations on top. That's a decision that you've got to make before you implement that thing usually. So it really, to me, comes down to like planning ahead.
Yeah, I mean, prioritizing is a big part of this whole process, especially for manufacturers, and you're looking at uptime and preserving that. Patch management is a real big issue for us right now in terms of identifying which ones we should do first. Has that been a vulnerability that you've uncovered with a lot of the folks that you've worked with on the OT side in terms of identifying which patches and where do we start?
Yeah, I mean, well, you see, definitely, like you see evidence of that everywhere in these types of programs. And yeah, the downstream side of that is really like, okay, what do we do? Like, which part of the elephant do we eat next on the customer side? So yeah, it is definitely like reaching that point of having too many vulnerabilities to kind of figure out what to do with, and then needing to really force a conversation about like threats and risks and priority off the back of that. Like every organization hits that point somewhere along the way, but OT definitely seems to hit it sooner.
No, it makes sense. Another thing, when you're talking about middleware, it kind of took me into this thought process. It's a big topic on the OT side of things, and that's secure by design. Because we talk about secure by design, and everybody's like, yes, we're in. It's important. Yeah. Then we ask who's going to do it, and we get people pointing every other direction. So I'm just kind of curious maybe to get some of your thoughts there in terms of where does the responsibility lie and how can we get better at it?
Yeah, definitely. Secure by design. So I actually was a pretty strong contributor to that, especially the vulnerability disclosure program side of things. Like I think the idea of, as a bare minimum, understanding that if you're out on the internet or if you're connected to the internet, then there's going to be things that people outside your organization will find, and that they need to feel safe telling you, and you need to have a way for them to tell you. Like to me, that's just almost table stakes. Like that's a physics issue at this point. So the fact that that's in SBD, I had played a role in that and some of the other things as well. I think you're right. Like it's definitely, like I think the secure by design principles as stated were definitely optimized towards like net new software and software producers. So if you go and try to take those things and put it on top of a legacy environment and just say go off and do the thing, you end up with that finger pointing kind of phenomena that you talked about before.
Yeah.
And there's some practical limitations to it. I think, in terms of what OT product manufacturers can do is make sure that they're considering these principles as they build new things. Then going through and thinking about like what of these principles can we start to fold in to what we've already got out there on the street. And then for organizations at that level, same sort of thing. It's like, okay, what's the principle behind this like requirement or recommendation in SBD? How can we kind of move in that direction? It is like, I do think SBD is funny because people do tend to talk about it and think about it as a compliance checklist, and it's not. It's actually not meant to be that. It's meant to be a set of like, this is what you should be aspiring to and constantly moving towards. And if you can attain it, awesome. But if you can't, you need to still be moving towards it, which to me makes it really useful as a list of design principles. It makes it kind of less useful as a compliance tool to build some carrot and stick around, but that's the nature of it.
No, absolutely. Another thing that you mentioned before, we can't get through any conversation pretty much with anything in manufacturing right now without talking about artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I mean, especially at the RSAC, it was a huge, huge component of everybody's pitch and what we were talking about. What have been some of the high points or some of the bigger talking points, I guess, around AI that you've noticed that are impacting things for either your community or your customer base?
Yeah. That's a big one because and literally as we're recording this, like the AI action plan just dropped this morning out of ONCD. So there's definitely a lot of motion around like what's happening there from a regulatory and a government standpoint. And like frankly, I'm only halfway through consuming that document. There's a lot in there. But yeah, we were involved in the original action plan out of ONCD, and I think the big thing there was just to firstly kind of get everyone oriented around like what do we mean when we say AI security, because everyone was kind of freaking out, but no one had really defined like the scope of that. The way I kind of talked about it and still do is really AI as a tool. So AI is something that basically decreases time to success either for hackers or attackers or defenders. AI as a target in terms of some of this sort of net new, like actually attacking and exploiting LLMs and AI itself issues. And then AI as a threat, which is basically the integration of AI into everything that we're kind of doing. And then, the kind of downstream consequences of that. I think the biggest shift that I'm watching is the acceleration, like actually the first one, in terms of as it relates to OT. Like it's very easy to learn, deploy, get whatever kind of objective you want to achieve done. From an attacker standpoint, leveraging AI. So what it's done is it's basically broadened kind of the group of threat actors that can actually get a thing done. Yeah. We've seen that in the crowd, like literally, like there's a lot of people using it to upskill more quickly. There's people like plugging it directly into their tooling to help them get things done, all that kind of stuff. And whenever we see that, it's safe to assume that the adversary is doing a similar thing because they're, back to where I started, it's a crowd in a similar way.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there's becoming this I think it could go either way, either an over-reliance on it for the good guys or just an overabundance of fear or concern because we know the hackers are using it as well?
Yeah, I think, wow, that's a really good question. I think we've got to get pretty aggressive about figuring out how we can solve real problems with AI on the defensive side. Not just flashy problems that get funded or that people buy because they're worried about missing out or whatever else, right?
Yeah.
I I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity there, and the reason I think that's kind of getting urgent, back to what we were saying before around how vulnerable everything is, we're going to pretty quickly reach a point where, the ability for attackers, regardless of whether they're good or bad, their ability to discover vulnerabilities is going to actually overwhelm our ability as defenders to do anything about it. So we actually need to speed up our ability to respond. And I do think that AI is going to play a huge role in that because there's sort of probabilistic decision making that always plays a role in doing that type of thing, especially when it's on the fly. And like AI is designed to be really good at that. We've got to implement it in the right way with guardrails and all those different things, but it's sort of designed to do that. So to me, there's a logical fit there that'll, play out somewhere into the future. But like not a lot of what I've seen pop out on the pure defensive side kind of solves this sort of problem that we're talking about with like legacy systems or different things like that. Like if you think about, AI-powered offense, a broadened kind of threat actor group. You talk about the fact that like we've got nation states that are getting a lot more aggressive and a lot more broad in how they attack things. We've got to get faster at responding and kicking them out. Really, I think that's a big thing. AI is going to play a role in that because there's not enough people to go around, right? So in terms of over reliance, maybe, but we need to actually be solving the right problems, not just the ones that we got told that we should solve.
No, I think that's well said. And I think that is part of the heart of the concern is people are so excited to implement it and they're not sure where yet. Let's throw it up there and see what it can do.
It's really easy to do stupid stuff with AI because you feel like you should. Do you know what I mean? Right. It's one of those ones where it's like, run, and like, cool, okay, let's do it. But, even going back to the tool target threat thing before, like the reason I did that was almost the same as what we're talking about here. It's like there was a collective agreement that we should do something, but no one had stopped to define what that something was. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. Makes sense. And that bleeds into one of the bigger issues in manufacturing too is spending money on stuff, and then you've spent money and ROI is already very difficult to validate. So then you're spending money on stuff and you need to backtrack and get it right. And it can be difficult depending on the culture of the organization as well.
For sure.
So one of the things I wanted to dive in, you mentioned it a little bit, the attackers, maybe their tactics aren't changing, but the attackers themselves are getting a lot more evolved, a lot more complex. Could you talk a little bit about some of the things you're seeing out there, whether it is a change in tactics, where it is some of these international groups, and how that's impacting sort of the threat landscape?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing, and I mean for context on this, like I've been hacking the internet since I was a teenager. Been operating in cybersecurity as a career since '99. So I'm kind of an old fart when it comes to answering these questions, seen a bunch of different evolutions. But yeah, probably the biggest thing that's relevant to manufacturing and OT is really that like nation on nation espionage, especially when you consider the West as the target nation. That's gone from being fairly stealthy and kind of espionage focused to just like let's just get access in as many places as we possibly can and then be in a position to use it opportunistically in the future, or to use it for tailored kind of scaled espionage operations or that kind of thing, but do it in a way that's not as concerned about stealth as I think it used to be prior to COVID. That to me was like the cut line in that behavior. So that that really does mean that, I think the traditional thinking around that was this idea that like you don't need to worry about a nation state, like, get your ransomware problem sorted out first, because you're more likely to encounter a cybercrime motivated threat actor than you are, Russia or China or whoever else. I don't think that's true anymore. So that's probably a big one, because that's the persistent, APT, that's the P in there. And it's something that's, I think, pretty much running 24/7 at this point in time. I think for, defenders to be just aware of the fact that that's true and thinking about how they prioritize understanding their perimeter in particular and doing things to lock it down. I think it should be in response to that. Probably the other thing I'd say is that, you've got like the blurring of traditionally cyber criminal operations with nation states as
Yeah.
well. So you've got, groups basically operating with the blessing, but with like a degree of arm's length from the security bureau or the intelligence unit that's kind of directing them, or at least kind of pointing, right? Then you got initial access brokers. So there's this entire layer of folk that are just opportunistically collecting access things and then on selling them. You've got, you flip it around a little bit. You look at what happened with the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, and the IT cyber army that is basically being run off a Telegram channel to hack Russia.
Yeah.
There's similar stuff happening in the Middle East right now. Like all of those things didn't really exist 5 years ago in this sort of same way. So the threat actor environment to me has changed a lot over that period of time. The attack surface in my mind hasn't actually changed that like as much as the TAs have, because a lot of the stuff that we were talking about 15 years ago we're still talking about today. In the absence of the addition of the new stuff.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think with a lot of these state-sponsored actors, organizations, if they are at arm's length or closer, it's hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah.
I think the industrial control systems that they've gotten into have been kind of by accident in some instances. They were going after utilities, and then they realized, hey, this is also going to work for that, brewery down the way.
Yeah.
And they're pretty smart in being able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, there's definitely that. I think. It depends on who your TAs are and kind of how they're being directed. I definitely agree. Like the fringe groups are less focused from a mission standpoint. If you've got like an identified kind of state-led TA, you can kind of attribute them sometimes based on what their goal seems to be. And it gets less true as you get kind of further down the food chain. So yeah, I fully agree with that.
Awesome. Casey, this has been really good stuff. I'm just kind of wondering, if we look bigger picture here, are there any big trends that you're seeing that might be coming down the way in the next year and a half?
Well, yeah, look, I always love that question. I've got to like solidify that answer before I head down to Vegas, because that's going to be a big conversation that comes up. I think, AI honestly is, I feel like at this point in time, it is a legitimate thing for everyone to be thinking about. I actually don't think that was as true, anywhere near as true, when ChatGPT and those things kind of first dropped. There was like this enormous peak in the hype cycle, and as security practitioners, we tend to get kind of cynical about that type of thing. And I think sometimes for good reason, but to me, that hype cycle peak was actually kind of predictive of the fact that it is going to find its way into basically everything over the next 10 years, right? Yeah. So, thinking it through like that, the tool target threat taxonomy, and thinking about the impacts and implications of this for the bad guys as well, and how we might be wanting to respond to that in the future. I overall think that, the attacker defender innovation kind of OODA loop is going to get way tighter. Okay. So the speed at which we can like adjust the way that we're responding based on what's happening in the world, I think that's, we got to be thinking about that, because at some point it's going to be so tight that we have to reconsider the game a little bit. So those are a couple of things. I think, quantum is still, from a tech standpoint, I feel like the oxygen kind of got sucked out of the room. There was some really good work happening around that prior to AI dropping, and it sort of got a little bit, overshadowed.
Okay.
Quantum as an issue is one that you don't have until you do. Right? So this whole idea of like the prerogatives around like, quantum resistant cryptography and all those different things. I see that. In a 10-year time scale, I can see that being a problem that we're actually dealing with. I don't feel like that's a tomorrow thing necessarily, but that's definitely something. And then just in general, I think there's a lot of reasons to be kind of pissed off and hacking the planet right now on the bad guy side, right? So I don't unfortunately, I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. God willing it does, right? But if you sort of look at history as a predictor of future, looks like it's going to trend towards being more chaotic at the very least. And yeah, some of these conversations we're having around threat actor behavior and the speed of this stuff, like part of the reason I harp on about it is that I do see that becoming more urgently relevant over the next 2 to 3 years.
You've mentioned that the response rate being more important a couple times, and how that's maybe lacking in some of the planning that's currently in place. What advice or what could you offer perspective in terms of improving that response time? Is there something we're missing right now, or companies just lax in general?
Yeah, I honestly, so on that, I think red teaming, like combining red teaming with a tabletop exercise, and actually having a place for that sort of activity to go inside your organization, so that you can at least test your own ability to respond, see if there's cracks in it, or if you haven't even thought about that, initiate that conversation and start to create some planning and some priority around it. The key with security, just in general, I think, is being proactively paranoid but not paralyzed, right? So probably the biggest thing is, for folks in the manufacturing industry in that audience that are like, I haven't done anything about this and you're freaking me out. It's like, no, don't do that. That's right. Not it's not the reaction that we want anyone to have, because it's not a reaction that makes things more resilient and more secure. So I do think, just getting, this is a thing the bug crowd can help with, which is, disclosing that here. But I do genuinely think that, getting kind of attacker feedback on your overall environment, and then taking that and figuring out like what would happen if this happened for real. That's a really important exercise. Full disclosure, all those different things, just, being aware as an organization that, this is something that we may have to respond to. So like, let's at least acknowledge that fact. If we're already doing that, let's test it. Those would be two things.
No, and I think that's important, because you can put a plan in that says we're going to immediately do this, or we're going to have a rapid response that is this. Yeah. But once you get there, even the tabletops, the pen testing, all of that is going to help you put that to test, so that people are actually ready to perform those steps exactly as quickly as they need to.
It's like, what does this actually look like, in the wild? Like it's that whole idea of like no plan surviving first contact. I think, trying to get to a point where you've at least simulated first contact as best you can. And then taking that seriously as an organization, like not just having that happen inside a security team or inside an engineering team. Because if this stuff just turns into a report that like makes a thud on someone's desk and that's it, then that's not the point. It's not, I think actually taking the output from this stuff and trying to work out how to integrate it into the specific threats and risks that affect your organization. Like that's the part that I think is most important, particularly for this sector, right? Because like manufacturing, you can reasonably expect that it's sort of coming onto the radar as a national security kind of critical infrastructure thing, which means that like there might be a need to respond quickly to threats around this stuff. So yeah, the tabletopping stuff is really important. I think that practically speaking, like check your perimeter, make sure you don't have anything kind of exposed or easily accessible that shouldn't. Check your vendor connections, because like supply chain attacks are very much a thing now. You look at like Salt Typhoon, and it's a different industry, but a lot of that was through smaller, acquired companies that had a security program that was different to the parent, and the target was actually the parent. So that's the thing. Some ideas there.
So Casey, we run the gamut here in topics and a lot of things focused on OT security. Anything else you'd like to share with the audience in terms of what you're up to, or what Bug Crowd is seeing right now? Yeah,
for sure. Look, I in terms of what Bug Crowd's doing, we've got a range of things. Like my initial description as a bug bounty and vulnerability disclosure platform, that's because that's usually kind of the motive of engaging us that folks are most familiar with. The purpose of building what we built was to take all of what's available in terms of hacker creativity on the white hat hacker side of things, and be able to deploy it into things that our customers need. according to their needs, right? So that looks like pen testing, it looks like red teaming, it looks like attack surface management and discovery. There's a bunch of different things that we deployed the platform and the crowd for at this point in time. So I wanted to just kind of fill that in from a what we're up to standpoint. And put the invite out for anyone who's listening, who's interested in talking about any of that stuff. We're always here to help out, and even just to talk strategy in terms of some of the stuff that we've discussed today. But outside of that, I'd probably land it and say like resilience over perfection is like that's the game. The thing that I've learned over and over again. In my security career and seen like demonstrated over and over again through the course of BugCrowd is that like there is no such thing as perfection. If you're attaining for 100% secure, like the only way you can really do that is by switching it off and throwing it in a pond, right? So this idea of just prioritizing and thinking about the problems that we're solving here in that kind of way. I think that's a useful piece of advice for anyone as a practitioner, but especially for this audience where you've got all of the challenges that we talked about. It's not just as simple as going out and patching the thing or switching the thing on and off or whatever else. Resilience over perfection. That's where I'd learn that.
Great stuff, Casey. Thanks so much for the time, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. It's been fun.
Thanks for the time today, Casey, and thanks to each and every one of you for joining us. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Casey Ellis, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.